Hello and welcome to Analysing Avatar, the podcast where we review episodes of the TV show, Avatar The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. I'm Dan, one of the co-hosts. What is one co-host without the other? See, Chris, I did it. I know that's a reference no one will get.
Nope.
That's just for you.
Nope,
because that's from a completely different podcast, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. What's one co-host without the other? I'm joined, of course, by Chris Billingham, the late Airbender himself, who has, for those of you new to the podcast, although at this point, weird place to jump in. It's part 2 of a 2-parter, but the premise, very basically, is we review episodes of those shows. I've seen them all before. Chris is a brand new viewer. There you go. That's it. We start with a recap. Would you like to know what happened this week, Chris?
I feel like there's a lot of podcasts these days using this format, but we were there early. We started doing this with Fringe, 8 years ago? Something crazy?
Yeah. When did Fringe Observer start? Oh, that's a hole I don't want to go down. Podcast. Let's find out. I don't know. Libsyn Fringe Observers. So it ended in 2018. So if I go into the archives, it started in March 2016.
There you go. So 7 years ago now. 7 years ago, baby, we were doing this shit.
7. I was doing the math in my head. I was like, that can't be just 7. Surely 2016 feels like way more than 7 years ago, but it's not 7. Chris's math checks out, guys.
I've been doing Nerdle. It's like a maths Wordle.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Nerdle. I lost a shift at work to that. There was one really tricky one, and it was me and a colleague were trying to do it, and we both just kept coming back up to each other. Have you figured this out yet? What do you think? I'm trying to put this over here, but we just neither of us could suss it out. It was. Do
you set yourself a no calculator rule, or do you allow yourself a calculator?
Oh, well, I think I reckon normally we sort of. Well, I don't really play it anymore. When I was playing it with a friend at work. The etiquette was no calculator, but that day we definitely cracked out calculators. Yeah. I can't remember which one it was. It was a particularly nasty one, and then the answer was so fucking simple. We were so annoyed. Anyway, doesn't matter. Welcome. We're going to talk about Civil Wars Part 2. This is the episode in which a very hasty trial occurs, in which sentences Korra's dad to death for being a part of the military coup. And then Unlock's all like, "Oh, let me talk to the judge. I'll straighten this out." And he's all like, "Hey, maybe not that." And the judge goes, "Okay." And then he looks like a hero. To which I went, suspicious. And it turns out suspicion's correct. Korra interrogates that guy afterwards and finds out that Unlock kind of set it all up to make himself kind of the hero. And in fact, it actually hit up a lot of the things that happened, including getting his brother Tonrock banished from the Southern Water Tribe in the first place. He'd hired bandits, because you remember last week, or maybe the week before, Chris, when that story got told, I questioned it because I'd forgotten this element, and so I went, who are these bandits who thought they could just take out the Northern the Northern Water Tribe? I said Southern earlier. No luck. It's a big city. We saw it. It's huge. It's like 8 guys. We're gonna take the city. It seemed insane, but it turns out it was all a setup, and that's why. And then Korra confronts the guy, and he's all like, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm still not gonna bend to your whims. I've got everything I want." So she bails. She rescues her dad and bails, and they all leave. Separate to that, Tenzin finally finds Iki and learns something about growing up. Is that how to phrase that?
I reckon so.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, Bolin is engaged briefly.
Yeah, he has a bison picnic, and he learns to love his siblings.
Yeah, or he learns to at least sort of understand that family relationships are complicated, and they're never simple. Yeah. On that note, Chris, I'd like to say my favourite quote from the episode immediately, if that's okay. It'll spring us off into a conversation about, admittedly, the smallest plot of this episode, but by far the funniest. Quick question: is this thing fast enough to get away from my crazy crazy waterbending ex-girlfriend? Why do you think I built this boat?
So good.
Is
Such
that
a funny, just him asking that is funny, but the response is phenomenal.
It's so good. Are we starting to understand why Varric is my favourite?
Yeah, when that happened, I was like, well, Dan's repeating that on the podcast.
Yeah, he's my favourite. I love him. I love everything about Varric. And I also love, there's always an undertone with Varric, right? So in this episode, Varric helps them, right? He's on their side this week. But there's always an undertone of Varric with, because it benefits him this week. Them helping, their goals are aligned. They've both, Korra's dad's in trouble in the same way Varric is in trouble. If Varric is caught, which he isn't initially, because he hides in a platypus barrel episode for comedic effect, and by that I mean like a stuffed platypus bear, not a live one. That'd be weird. But he, you get the sense always with Varric, he just will team up with whoever benefits him the most at the time. And Korra had a vested interest in resolving the issues with Unalaq, and that helps Varric. So Varric's on Korra's side. But you just feel like the minute the wind blows the other way, Varric will just do what he wants. And I love that about his character. I just love that he's just going to always follow he's going to follow the money, or he's going to follow whatever thing he wants personally. And he's never going to give a shit about anything else. I kind of love that. Yeah, so I mean,
it was a really funny episode in general, wasn't there? Like the whole stuff about him hiding in the bear. Is your assistant in there with you?
Yeah,
we haven't got honey in here. Really? It's a bear.
Yeah. Also, I really enjoyed when they're trapped by the crowds, and he's like, they're not going to get on the boat, and he's like, Julie, do the thing, and she throws money out the back of the bear. That bear's pooping out money, and everyone goes crazy.
Yeah, and it seemed like in general like a lot funnier than even like the last episode, and it's a part 2, but it seemed just a lot lighter in tone.
I wonder why that is. Is that, do you think, because the previous episode had 2 kind of main plots? 3 really. It's the same 3 plots. It's Korra dealing with Unalaq and her dad. And that situation is plot A. Plot B in both episodes is Tenzin's search for Iki. And plot C in both is Bolin's attempts to break up with Eska. The Varric stuff in this episode is really kind of linked with plot A. So I think plot A gets a lighter tone this week because there is a side part to plot A now that is funny, that didn't previously exist. That was a very self-serious storyline. Plot B, we're out of the conflict period of that plot now. So the conflict occurred last week, Tenzin fighting with his siblings. And now we're just the sweet Tenzin having the tea party with the bison and his daughter, which is fun and sweet and very light. And then plot C, the sort of comedic payoff for Bolin's failed attempts last week occurs this week. So I think all 3 plots get to be lighter this week because of the way it's structured.
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth in that.
Yeah, because I think you're right. This one, which for a part 2, you expect it to get a lot more serious, but actually, it's pretty. As you pointed out, it's got a much lighter tone. How do we feel about the main plot then? How do you feel about where we're going with this? Because it's obviously Civil War's part 2, not much of a civil war. Would be my criticism, my main overriding thought of this episode. More of a 1 or 2 light, kind of boring scuffles. This episode is light on action, and when it has action, it ain't great. It's a bit flat.
Yeah, so let's go there, because I'm watching. I enjoyed it because I thought it was funny, and I enjoy that we're sort of ripping into that can of worms that is this dude's obviously the villain. So now let's overtly talk about him being the villain. So I like the episode, and look, this is I think there might be some odd. Some critiques of this episode, especially with what we're about to discuss. But let's be honest as well. There's a caveat we often give, which is, we're sitting here talking about the episode for an hour. It's more interesting to talk about the holes. If I'm watching this through, just watching it and not analysing it for a podcast, that episode finishes and I'm like, oh, cool, next one. Do you know what I mean? So we're not talking, we're not talking scorch the earth, this is awful. We're just critiquing because, 8 years ago we decided this format would work for a podcast, and Dan said, "Oh, we'll just do it with Fringe Observers." And for some reason, here we are 8 years later doing it for another show.
Our third. Actually, fourth show.
Fourth. Our fourth show, yeah. So Fringe, Steven Universe, Over the Garden Wall, Avatar. So it's our fifth.
Yeah,
Avatar. And what did you forget about Over the Garden Wall?
No, I forgot Over Garden Wall. I did Avatar as 2.
Yeah, right. But
we
okay,
did do
so
Over
we're
the
just,
Garden Wall as well.
So we're just critiquing for the sake of critiquing. I enjoyed this episode. I enjoy this show. But when they're doing the rescue and they're airbending the ships out of the way, I'm watching that going, but ships had bombs and stuff during Avatar. The ships had defenses. What the fuck? Just passing through the ships like they're toys in a bathtub. I was like, why is no one defending? Isn't this an army? Why is there no bombs in the air? Why is there no fight from the people on the ships? Why, when they get onto the ship, is they just really easily water bending, people so they're captured? And that could have been epic. That could have been such an epic rescue mission, and it's just not.
Yeah, this is the second episode in a row where I felt a strong sense of the action lacking. And last week we talked a bit in the trivia about how there were bigger plans for an action sequence, larger scale action sequence with lots of guys, and it ended up just becoming, Korra having a scuffle with 3 or 4 guys. Sadly, we have a similar situation this week. An action sequence is from the trivia, but we'll do it now because it's relevant to this point. The action sequence in which Team Avatar breaks through the Northern blockade was actually cut in half due to time purposes and animation difficulties, meaning they ran out of money and time based on what Nickelodeon were willing to give them, so they had to adapt. Part of the deleted sequence included Mako hanging upside down from a plane and firebending at the Northern ships, which is a really cool visual that I would have liked to have seen. Yeah, there are two. Sorry, my cat's just meowing at me. I literally, right, Chris? We had a set time for recording. He was meowing. I fed him. I gave him water. I made sure his litter tray was clear, and I opened the window. He very rarely uses the litter tray, and I opened the window for him. There's nothing he could possibly want from me at this stage. He has absolutely everything. And yet he's still in here meowing at me. He's gone now, but dear Lord. That cat. Anyway, right. Back to my point. So the action sequence last week felt lackluster, and here we are again with another situation where there are two action beats in this episode. One of them is Korra and Unalaq's little scuffle in the prison when she goes and finds out her dad isn't there, and then there's the boat rescue and getting through the blockade. Both are flat, uninteresting, unengaging, really low key, just they're there. It feels like, as a viewer, what it ends up feeling like is like they're there because you need an action beat, not because the show naturally wanted one or had an interesting idea for how to execute an action beat, but because actually they just, it was like, oh, well, it's an Avatar show. Okay, now they fight a little bit. But that's how it comes across. But knowing the backstory, you just realise it's yet again Nickelodeon having zero confidence in this show, which, considering the success of Last Airbender, will never not astound me. Because Last Airbender was not given budget constraints. Or if they were minor and didn't impact the show as it goes. Maybe they had to do the Ember Island Players episode, which was low budget, in order to save a little money to do the epic finale, the 5-part action-packed cinematic masterpiece that was the finale of the original show. And here they are, scraping together a couple of blasts of fire. It's embarrassing, and it is hurting the show. Weird. It's not the end of the world, as Chris said. Critiques always come across stronger on a podcast like this because they're always more interesting to discuss than just saying, "Yeah, this was good, this worked." So I don't want to emphasize the actual plot, the things that occur in this episode, the character stuff, all as good as always. But that is normally supplemented with action and visuals to match. And I didn't care too much for the action last week. I did like some of the creative stuff that Korra did in the fight scene last week. That was kind of Jackie Chan-esque. We talked about that, where she used to wrap the guys up and stuff. But this week, dear Lord, it is painful. So yeah, that's where
it is, and like you say, it's distracting because it just doesn't feel very epic, and it just feels particularly underwhelming, I think, in that rescue scene, because you're just like, why are they not fighting back? Like, what? This is weird.
Yeah, it's too easy because it has to be easy. That's the other problem. There's no tension to the fight scene because there's no back and forth. They've not been allowed to have a back and forth. What happens is their plan is break through, and they break through because you can't have they clearly don't have the money all the time or whatever, the resources to have, oh no, they're nearly going to hit us with fireballs or, giant icebergs they're firing off, catapults into the air or whatever. I don't know, it's the water tribe, so they do different stuff. But do you know what I mean? Like, there's no attempt at all to make the fight a back and forth, which means there's no tension to it. It's just, they're going to do the thing. They did the thing. Cool. So not only is the action scene fall a bit flat and doesn't have anything particularly unique or interesting visually going on in it, there's no tension to it either, making it feel even more pointless. In that case, why not just have Korra break her dad out? Why even do the boat stuff?
Yeah, why is he on a boat? Why is he not in another prison?
Right, but or even just okay, if you only got the money, you got your boat sequence and your fight in the prison, just do the fight in the prison and make that the thing and make that where her dad is, and then they get away and they get on Varric's boat and they go. It's just yeah. I don't know. Because you could even play that, because someone will go, oh, what about the blockade, all the water tribe ships? Have a joke where Varric has a button he presses that turns all of the flags on his ship to water tribe once, and he just sails through. Doesn't matter. You could just make up a thing.
That would have been great.
You know what I mean?
That's a great joke.
Really because he likes to travel around the world, so his ship just kind of can become whatever he wants it to be, so he can enter any land. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't even matter. It's not a big thing. It's my point more is that you've got two undercooked action sequences. Give me one then. I don't need both. If you can't do them properly, just give me the one and do it right. Or at least give the one that we have some dramatic flair and a bit of tension, where I feel like for a minute the heroes are in danger, because I felt nothing for that in this, and it is the climax of this 2-part story.
And we have to see her Korra go into the Avatar state as well, which just I can't help now every time she does that, being like, oh, it's just a bit too easy for her, and it's something connected to her spiritual side, which at the beginning of this season was what this season was about, and it's sort of
we're told she doesn't have that connection to the spirits, and yet she's just regularly just tapping into her ancestors' powers,
Yeah, and we have, as a side note, slightly moved away from that story now. But I suppose that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, this week we did get a little bit of a progression of that, in that she says to Unalaq, well, let my dad go, or I'm just not going to help you with your stupid spirit portal plan, whatever the hell you're up to. And he's like, I don't even need you anymore. That plan's going ahead. So whatever that was is still happening. But our immediate situation now, for the focus of this episode, is the reveal that Unalaq is a villain, is truly a villain. Korra discovering that, and then them escaping the Southern Water Tribe. Which is fine. It doesn't need to. Not every episode needs to be focused on the spirits thing. But you're right, they keep undermining themselves a little bit, because I'd say the Avatar state is a spiritual part of what the Avatar does, and the ease in which she uses it is, quite frankly, baffling. It's because also unnecessary, right? Couldn't she have just been bending this week? it was just waterbending she was doing, right? Did she need the Avatar state for that? Waterbending isn't waterbending the one she's supposed to be the best at?
Yeah. All she basically did was waterbending, I think. Like, obviously, was she doing a bit of firebending on the side to make the helicopter go? But
yeah, she did firebending on the side, but she knows firebending. She's a master of firebending. That's why she was studying. The only one she should be a little weaker at and maybe need a bit of helping hand with, theoretically, is airbending. And this week we saw her on the plane using firebending and then waterbending to move the ships, which is fine. I would not, for a second, if she'd not used the Avatar state, gone, how she managed that? It's not. I don't need. Wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, I don't question it. And it's also it's the misuse of it as a power booster, quote unquote, rather than a way to get abilities from the past. Making a big wave with water should be well within her power, regardless of the Avatar state.
Yeah, I wouldn't have questioned it at all. It's not like she's Rey in Star Wars. I'm joking. I hate that. I hate that fucking criticism. Separate thing. I think it was strange. It's a weird one, but do you think if you take the humor out of this episode, it's actually probably, other than the Tenzin side story, a bad episode? Because I didn't feel like it was a bad episode, but when I think about it, a lot of it felt a bit rushed. You know, I know we've known all along
the court case,
yeah, but just the court case, but also then he did this. What? Yeah, but he also did this. What? I'm not gonna say. No, tell me everything. Okay, like, do you know what I mean? Like that. That hummingbird hummed, like it just all felt a bit speedy.
Yeah, it felt like it didn't feel like a natural way for Korra to discover this stuff. It felt like the writers needed her to know that stuff, so they forced it. That's what it felt like to me. And I don't want to sound like, I'm giving the right. They're clearly under a lot of constraint here. But like for me, having her just yell at a guy and threaten him until he does it is not really a clean way for her to acquire information. Maybe make this episode that. Maybe the trial is ongoing, and the whole episode is the task of she's on the hunt to try and prove her dad's innocence while the trial is ongoing, and everyone's like, Korra, why aren't you attending the court? And she's like, because he's going to be found guilty on the current evidence, so I need to be out there hunting it down. And she's going through documents or whatever. She breaks onto one of the Northern Water Tribe ships, maybe, that's out on the water, gets into like Unalaq's like personal study or something, and that's the goal of the episode. And and then she can feel a bit more earned, a little less rushed. Whereas in this, it's like there's a whole section of this that's the trial. They're found guilty. And then, we get to see a little bit more of Unalaq being a master manipulator, which is good and does really build on his character, but builds on a thing we already know he does. So it's like...
Yeah, but also there are elements of that, like Marco, whilst it's a funny joke that he bribes the wrong person, nothing becomes of it. Like that, if you think about the actual time dedicated to give him the money, you know what to do, wink, this is what I did, look over there, oh no, I got it wrong. Like, it's quite a bit of time for just a joke.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, because like when you think about it's that old thing we used to talk about this a lot. The old time to gag ratio, and we talked about this in the context of stand up. If you're doing a big bit and there's not many jokes for a period of time because you're building up to a laugh, a specific sort of almost payoff, then that laugh has to be equal or greater to the amount of time you've made people wait for it. If you're not going to be peppering in lots of small laughs, you really need the big laugh to be worth that period of time when it's not happening. And I'm not sure the payoff of I paid off the wrong guys is enough to justify it being 3 scenes worth of interaction. Why can't Varric just be in there and be like, hey, I'm hiding in here until this all blows over? He doesn't need to be also separately trying to pay off a judge. It's minutes wasted in this script that could have been used to buffer any other element of this story. especially when you look at like the final moment, the joke we talked about that we really liked, is built naturally into the plot and happens in about 20 seconds. And it's a bigger laugh by quite some way.
Yeah, that is helped though by that. That's backed up by that. So that moment is supported by obviously the tension throughout the whole episode about him, trying to break up with her.
Exactly though. That's what my point is. They've built on the story that's already occurring, not created one to create a joke that doesn't go anywhere, doesn't add to anything. That's the difference, isn't it? It's like, that the benefit of making your jokes relevant to the things that are actually happening already and are being established already is you can just do the joke in a few seconds, not cost any time, and get the laugh. You're winning, aren't you? You're winning on all fronts. Having to sideline up or take a side street in your story to wiggle your way back round to the main story just for the joke, that detour is not worth it. That's when it becomes not worth it. I mean, and here's the funny thing as well is it could have been done quicker. I mean, it's not a huge part of the story anyway. But like, even if they just got into the courtroom and they just had Asami looking worried and Bolin being like, "Don't worry, Asami. Varric gave me money to pay off, to pay them off, to pay off the right people, and I've already sorted it. This is all going to be fine." And then he looks around and he's like, oh, like that. You could do it in like a line then. That's different. Then you get the joke and it's kind of built in. But it's this little back and forth. It's like almost like a tiny little B plot or a C, D plot, whatever you want to call it. So it's weird. Yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff I wasn't fond of. I do like, though, if we want to talk about things that work about this episode for me, I do really like what they're doing with Unalaq as a character. It is another character that seems to be power grab, which isn't great, but we still don't really know what he's doing with these portals. So that's kind of like the spirit stuff is still a bit of a question mark for him. But certainly pushing his brother out of the way to grab power is not unfamiliar to people who watched Korra season 1.
No, yeah, I am struggling with that. Like the echoes of series 1 are there for me. I'm like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. And I like Tonrok as a character. What makes him any more interesting than Unalaq as a character? But what's separating him from, Amon from last year or Amon's brother, the guy in the council whose name I always forget. Damn it.
I can't remember.
You say some words and I'll Google them.
Yeah, I just think it's just echoing similar beats, isn't it? Brother against brother, one trying to make the other one, living in the shadow their whole life. Well, I suppose there was a bit of that with the flashback and stuff. So yeah, it just feels a bit similar.
Tarlok. So Tarlok from last season was, he was on the council, and that was his whole vibe. Was like, it was they were both power grabbing, but in different ways. Whereas in this case, one brother isn't power grabbing; he's trying to do the right thing, and one brother is power grabbing, and that's the conflict. But either way, it doesn't. It is quite similar, at least so far. And while that wasn't a problem necessarily in the first few episodes when there was still intrigue, the more we learn about what Unalaq has done, the more it becomes clear that they're the same plot. And I think that's why we didn't necessarily have that criticism of the early episodes of this season, because it was more about him manipulating to get Korra to bend to his will. Now all of a sudden he doesn't need Korra anymore. Which also, that's a shame to drop that plot too, because I liked the idea that he kind of needed to keep Korra on side. Because I even enjoyed the bit this week, that whole thing with the judge, as much as I make jokes about it, that whole thing where the judge sentences them to death and he talks him down is so carefully planned. And even though it's obvious what he's doing and that he's just trying to make himself look like the hero for, requesting leniency, and it is a little bit on the nose, it's still a really neat idea. It is still another piece of really good manipulation for a character that's shown himself to be so adept at bending people to his will, getting his way. It makes him feel like a threat in a different way to previous characters in this show, because, Tarlok last year was not a threat in that way. Korra saw through him pretty much from day one. She never really trusted being on his on his task force, and when she did, it was out of desperation to try and catch him on. And he didn't really have her on side for very long at all before she immediately sort of went, no, this guy's dodgy as fuck. Whereas Unalaq was a lot more successful. Multiple episodes, like 4 or 5 episodes of sort of keeping Korra on edge, like keeping Korra, like, not on edge, but like, you know, within his sort of plan and on side. I mean, he already drove her trainer away, her teacher away. Tenzin's gone, you know. So I'm still enjoying elements of that plot quite a lot, if I'm being honest. But like, its biggest weakness is that it is too similar to the previous year. But I still really am. I mean, the spirit stuff is still like on the bubble as being like, well, that's an interesting hook that we still have sitting out there. You know, that's not been resolved yet. We still don't know what exactly he's after with these portals and what that means. And they kind of set out their goal at the end of this episode. I don't know how you felt about that. At the end of this episode, they're like, we got to go to the president of the United Nations or whatever, and be like, I think the Unified Nations or something like that they're called, which is the army Boomy used to fight for, and like tell them what's happening, that there's civil war happening, and that they need to step in maybe to stop this from spreading. Yeah, I don't know how you felt about that as a setup for maybe where we're going next.
Yeah, I enjoyed that because it fleshes out the world. We will potentially, you know, get to see an area of the world we've not seen before. I think it's good that they've got a plan. I think it's going to be interesting. Avatar as a show, you know, other than the mentor figures, we tend to, you know, whenever Katara and Sokka met their dad, they were separated quite quickly. So how long the Avatar stays with, because they're all together, like she's with her dad at the moment, isn't she? And like they're
yes.
and the rich guy, and they're all together. So whether they'll keep them together or not, I don't know. So I think that's quite fun. It's funny though, isn't it? Because it's one of those things where I am excited for that plot, and again, this isn't a criticism I'd have got to just watching it, but it's a really fleshed out, detailed world, but to the point where we've got a lot of characters, and you know, like Asami, is it Asami? I mean, you know, she's just hanging around at this point.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
She hasn't said or done anything in like 4 episodes, maybe 5.
Yeah, Asami.
Like, first episode of the season was the last time Asami had anything to do.
Yeah, Asami is, you know, Charlie in season 2 of Lost. Like, season 2, part 2 of Lost. Like, just sort of there in the scenes, giving a line for the sake of giving a line. And
the week before last, she wasn't even that. I mean, there was an episode or 2 in a row where she didn't even appear. It's even worse.
Yeah, and I think it's indicative of, this is not a team Avatar. We do not have a team Korra. We have a group of kids that have gone through some love triangle bullshit, and now they're still sort of in each other's lives. If we're comparing, I do miss the sense of a team Avatar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think it's okay for a period of time. It's like, I always find it interesting, and take a shot at everyone, Doctor Who reference time. Doctor Who was always really interesting to see the difference between Russell T Davies' era and Moffat's era. And what Moffat did that was different to Russell was, when they were travelling in Russell's era, it was like they got on the TARDIS and that was it. They were travelling. They might pop back home and we will see them arrive and then leave at the end of that episode. But we never got a sense they were visiting home regularly outside of what we were seeing. And every week it's like, you open up, we're in a new planet, a new place, and the companion was with them. In Moffat's era, you'd get episodes that would start with them being back home living their lives, and the Doctor popping back in. So it wasn't like they were travelling with the Doctor, it was like they were sporadically travelling with the Doctor. You know, like, so, like, Clara had a teaching job, and like, it wasn't like she was hopping on the TARDIS with the Doctor and they were going from adventure to adventure to adventure. It was like every adventure he brought her back, you know. And they did the same a little bit with Amy and Rory, where there were multiple occasions where the Doctor left them on Earth and then would appear and they'd be like, it's been 3 years, and he'd be like, oh shit, fuck that one up again, you know. And that was a really different way to approach those two stories, you know, those two ways of like handling the quote unquote team, and it does change the dynamic because it allowed Amy and Rory and Clara to have home plots that evolved off screen, where we didn't ever get that opportunity with Martha and Donna. They all always progressed on screen because we only ever saw the adventures, when they would go home. And I think what's really interesting about what they've done here in Avatar is I think they've deliberately chosen not to have that format again. The same way that it felt like Moffat deliberately chose to make travelling on the TARDIS a bit more of a fleeting thing, rather than I'm travelling with it and I'm gone until I'm done. And I think the choice here to sort of have a more flexible Team Avatar, who's present to support the Avatar, certainly feels more realistic. It certainly feels more grounded, and it certainly feels different to Last Airbender. Do you lose something in that? Yes. Yeah, I think you do. I think you do lose a sense of camaraderie and a sense of friendship across it. That those undeniable bonds that that core Team Avatar from Last Airbender had. Definitely gone, but it's a different show. The same way that in Doctor Who, once they were traveling with the Doctor, they were traveling. Once Aang, Katara, and Sokka were on their adventure, they were on their adventure. Here, they're living their lives alongside the adventure continually occurring over time. So of course they're spread. It's not like they've all jumped on the back of a bison and gone off to travel together. This is not one journey. This is journeys occurring alongside their existing lives, and I think it would be, if you want to do that, the price you pay is you lose that sense of they're on this one trip together and this is that entire journey. Instead these are the continuing adventures of the people, and as a result, because their lives are getting in the way, they're not always going to be there. Sometimes maybe Michael will be off doing his police work. Sometimes Asami's not really necessary to the plot and therefore just isn't there. And there's a benefit to that too. It means that sometimes a character that's not needed doesn't need to be there. Imagine it would have been so much worse those last 2 episodes had Asami been present by force. Because there's nothing for her to do. So in a weird way, that's worse, right? That then she really is Charlie in Season Jules. The last 2 episodes, she wasn't present at all. And they were able to do that. They were able to just go, well, she's not there. So yeah, you do lose something from it, and I feel it, and I understand what the concern is, and I agree with that concern. I don't think that's invalid at all, but I think it's a deliberate choice, and I think there are benefits to it too, which allows them to keep this cast fresh and moving, and you just use the characters they want to use, and not necessarily have the clutter of other characters. They can have a wider cast than Avatar as well, more people to explore. Admittedly, not taking massive advantage of that just yet, but we're only halfway into Season 2 of 4, so plenty of time for that to be a more useful strategy going forward. But I don't know, does that make sense? Am I rambling? I might be rambling. It's possible.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Do you, what did you think of the Tenzin storyline? I thought it was so sweet. I thought the little air bison picnic was really sweet. I thought, Boomy saying, I'm sorry I didn't become an airbender. I hope I still made you proud, to his dad's statue. The way he was comforted by his sister, I thought all that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I talked for a lot on that last bit, so I was literally going to ask you this question. But very quickly, the Boomy thing. Love the Boomy thing. The Boomy thing is probably my favourite moment from this episode. I know you hoped I'd be an airbender. I just tried to live up to you and tried to do good. I love the focus on just trying to do good, trying to do right in the world, and then ending on I hope I made you proud. It's just such a strong, clear, well-written character, Boomy. It's such just laser focus with Boomy. I understand that character so thoroughly in so little time. Incredible stuff. So how did you feel? I'm guessing you liked it because it's probably my favorite part of this entire episode. And for those who don't recall, this is Tenzin finds Iki. She's simply gotten away from her troubled siblings. Her sibling arguments and bickering, and gone off. And the reason she's been missing is not through anything nefarious, but actually she just went off to see these young children, air bisons, and she's ended up having a little fake tea party with them. And Tenzin finds her having just argued with his siblings, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I left because I didn't want to deal with my siblings. He's like, yeah, can I join you on that? And then, like, because he's also in the same position, and it's almost like they learn together, which is just like a really sweet thing. So that's for anyone who doesn't remember this side plot specifically, but it's my favorite part of the episode by an absolute mile. So 2 weeks in on the trot, the best thing in the episode has been the Tenzin sub story, but whatever.
I think there's so much real brutal honesty to him essentially admitting his problems and him addressing them with his child. Do you know what I mean? Like, you see people talk to their kids as they make them breakfast, and even when the kids aren't talking yet, sometimes they'll just offload and they'll talk to them. And that moment of honesty where he says, "Oh, can I join you? Oh, can they be my siblings too?" Like, it's such rich thematic content. It's so rich. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. It's so layered, it's so textured. The fact that he's relating with her in that way, like the little touches to it that are just adorable, when she's talking to the bisons about whether he can join and whether they can be siblings, and she's just talking and she's like, no, he's nice, yeah,
yeah.
Oh, they say you could join, like, just little touches like that. And you know what it is? I think the reason it's the strongest part of the episode is because of moments like that. There's little touches done for nuance, but also adding layers to the story. That says a lot about her character, but it's also funny, it's also sweet. And I think they're doing so much layered, rich work with that storyline that when you then cut back to a sequence which is meant to be this daring rescue, and it's just a bit flat, and there's not even the action you want, let alone the other layers. I think that's why it's very easy to say, well, the Tenzin and the siblings part is by far the best part of the story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I think this comes back to the old thing for me, a bit of character over narrative anyway. Like, I'm much more invested in the emotional journey of Tenzin right now than I am Korra's, because Korra's is so heavily plot based. It's learning things and getting MacGuffins and going places. Like she's gone to a portal, she's MacGuffined it. It's not been as much about her character as the Tenzin plot, which has been much more character focused. And what they've done with a very short amount of screen time, I should say, with Tenzin is kind of remarkable, actually, because with unburdened by an overcomplicated plot, and maybe that's the conclusion we're going to come to with the end of the season. Maybe we're going to sit back at the end of the season and go, they bit off more they could chew with this storyline, and that's maybe where these problems are occurring. Obviously some elements of budget and stuff as well with some of our criticisms of the fighting, but maybe that is the ultimate issue here. Maybe this plot was bigger than a season could contain. And as a result, character stuff is getting lost in the shuffle because they're having to burn through the plot. All the screen time is being used plot. Whereas here, nice, simple, what's the story? Ikki's missing. That's the story. And during that, we get all the character stuff with Tenzin and his siblings, followed by Tenzin finding Ikki, finding out she's run away from her siblings, and then relating to each other, and him learning a really valuable lesson. When he returns to the other two, when he returns to Kaya and Bumi, and he's like, "I'm really sorry. Like, I find it hard not to see Dad. I'm sorry. I always put Dad on the pedestal and see him for for something he wasn't necessarily, or something like that." I can't remember how he phrases it, but he basically says, he acknowledges that their dad wasn't perfect, and that goes a long way. Oh, here we go. I found the line. I wanted to apologise for how I acted yesterday. I worked so hard to celebrate Dad's legacy that I may have overlooked the parts of him that were less than ideal. And then Kaya says, "We're sorry for dumping our frustrations with Dad out on you." Because that's the element I didn't even think about, actually, was that, of course, Tenzin kind of weirdly represents Aang. That both of their grievances is the word I was looking for there. Grievances were with Aang, not Tenzin. But because Tenzin kind of represents Aang in many ways, both through appearance and the air nomad stuff and the air bending stuff, and also because he was the one defending Aang, they accidentally sort of treated their issues with their dad and loaded them onto Tenzin. Like, Tenzin was the issue. Tenzin didn't do those things. Tenzin's an innocent party in that situation, and that is so nuanced and so complex and so, again, true to life and honest. These sibling relationships. We talked about this a lot last week too. And it's like they did that in like a third of the screen time, and then you look at what's going on the Korra side of the plot, and you're like, and it's just like a lot of political intrigue, sure, but none of the character stuff, none of it, no nuance, no subtle character stuff, and it's a perfect demonstration of what I've said, what I've always has stood by, which is that you can invest me in the simplest of plots if I'm invested in the people. If I don't care about the people, how do I care about what their adventures are? And that's what's happening a little bit with Korra right now, I think. I'm not 100% on board with her journey right now. I don't know what it is she's learning, other than never to trust anyone who wants to be her mentor, ever, because they all keep turning out to be bastards. With the
It's also
of
just... It's also moving at such a bizarre pace. Like, you think about the Tenzin story. I can't remember the child's name. Child's lost.
Iki.
They go look for the child. In finding the child, they discover something about themselves. You talk through, and that's the last 2 episodes, by the way. That's this 2-parter. You talk about the Korra side of things. Well, they go there, and then there's going to be a battle, but there's not this. There's kind of a mutiny, and then everyone gets arrested, and then they're going to get sentenced to death, but then they're not going to get sentenced to death. But then she goes to free them, but they're not there, and it turns out they're going somewhere else. So then she then goes somewhere. No, first of all she meets the guy, and the guy basically dumps exposition on her and us for a few minutes, and then she goes and gets him. And then, do you know what I mean? Like, and I know I've missed stuff, and I know that's in the wrong order, but my point is, it's just plot, but not even like it almost becomes slightly coherent, because it's so, you go here, then you go here, then you go here, then you go here, then you go here. It's not, you go here and learn this. They go here and they experience this. They go here. It's so, there's so much.
We're not getting a beat to explore how that makes any of the characters feel.
No, it's like, I think we've talked about it before on this very podcast, if not maybe Avatar or something. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before. But I'm going to keep talking about it, because I'm going to keep talking about it until everyone in the world understands or acknowledges or addresses the fact that one of the cleverest things Spider-Man No Way Home did is made every single, because that's a very, you go here, go here, go here, go here, go here story. Like, it really does. It's almost a road trip movie in its kind of lack of subplot, then we cut over here and this is happening over here. That happens briefly, when spoilers 1, 2, 3, the other Spider-Men appear. But fundamentally, that film's very ABC. But every single decision in that movie services Tom Holland's Spider-Man character. Even the other scenes that service the big scene that services Garfield's Spider-Man. If you don't know that reference, if you haven't watched that movie, it's fine, because that scene is still serving Holland's character. It stops him from experiencing more grief. It shows what that relationship represents to Peter 2, and therefore Peter 1. Like, every decision is servicing Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I don't really feel that any decision is servicing Korra in these last 2 episodes. Might eventually, obviously, she's ending this 2-part story without the mentor she had at the beginning. But how's that affecting her? How's that? What does that mean for what she wants to do now? Stuff is happening to Korra in these last 2 episodes, but I don't feel like the plot is servicing the character of Korra. And I know that's essentially what Dan said 5 minutes ago without the Spider-Man detour, but the point remains.
Yeah,
I stand by it.
I definitely can't be high and mighty about detouring to get to a point. My whole Doctor Who thing took about 20 minutes to explain, so don't worry about it. But I agree with you, and I think what was good, what was clever about, if we to stick with that analogy to make it clean about, I think in No Way Home, they had the sequence in the apartment where they all stopped and talked, and then they had the sequence in the science lab when they all stopped and talked, and we got to outline how these events make these characters feel. Right when they first bring the two other Peters to Tom Holland's Peter, it's in his lowest moment, and they talk him through that because it's about how he feels. It's about him as a character. They don't show up and help him win a fight. That's later. The first thing they do is show up and help him get through what will be one of the most difficult emotional moments of his young life. That's a really smart choice. And again, we just the show isn't ever taking a breath to do that. And I think maybe the conclusion we'll come to at the end of this, when we've seen all 13, 14 episodes, is maybe they just bit off more they could chew with the plot. I think, and they didn't have the time. They should have chosen maybe a simpler plot with a few less twists and turns, so we could spend more time doing the character work, earning that. But we'll see. Time will tell. That it's one episode. An episode that, again, as Chris pointed out at the beginning, I didn't dislike, which is contrary to how this podcast certainly makes it sound. There are definitely tons of issues with this with this episode, but we can sit here for 50 minutes and pull those apart and work out why. But the reality is, in terms of just a piece of entertainment, it was enjoyable. Not perfect, but enjoyable. But it could be more. It's starting to become clear that this season hasn't quite figured that out yet. It still might, but right now we're in a bit of a dip. It's the same thing that happened in the first season, if you recall. Our least favorite episode of the first season was equally around this point. It was that Spirit of Competition episode, which may very well have been episode 5 of season 1. And I think this is episode 5 of season 2. So hopefully this is the low, and it's all up from here. But yeah, I cannot tell you in simple words, how much I loved the other side of this story and how many problems I found with the Korra end of it.
And of course, sitting smack bang in between the Marco plot, which is just pure entertainment.
You mean? I assume you mean the Bolin plot.
Oh, sorry, the Bolin plot. But so funny that I forgive it for just being pure entertainment. And there's not a huge amount of time scattered throughout the episode, but I'm willing to bet if you add the screen time they give that plot, it's not much.
No, and that's fine. And for those who don't recall, this is the episode of which he breaks up with Eska finally. But actually, no, that's a lie. He attempts to. She decides that she's just going to marry him. We get to see a very funny moment where Bolin is dressed in full-on Southern Water Tribe or Northern Water Tribe garb. He gets the betrothal necklace. They've done the whole relationship backwards, because usually by Water Tribe customs, the male would hand the betrothal necklace over, but Esker has just done that herself. And we see him with all the bowl cut hair. It's a really funny moment. And at the end, because of the escape and the stealing of essentially people who've been accused of or have been tried and found guilty of being treasonous, that breaks off their wedding for him rather than him actually getting to get away with it by saying it. And that leads to a really funny moment that we talked about already at the end, and sort of sets us up for our next episode maybe. I hope they don't just leave that, because she's literally following the ship, so they need to, the next episode needs to start with that.
Yeah, for sure. But and another good example of some good decisions for pacing. There's an ice cream truck outside. You may be able to. That may be picked up on the mic.
What song is it playing? I can't hear what song.
Just a generic ice cream. It's not that. It's just a generic sort of. I don't know. I can't hum it. Just a generic ice cream.
I love the idea, Chris, that it was ice cream. Yeah. I went past one a few weeks ago, and it was playing a tune that was weirdly familiar to me. And I was like, what is that? And I realised later on it was Match of the Day. It was just doing the match of the.
Someone told me this morning, and they'd read it somewhere or seen it, that apparently here's a fact for you, Dan. This will make you feel old. If they were to remake Back to the Future today with loosely the same plot, the year they would travel back to would be 1993.
Yep.
And then someone pointed out that at the beginning, the truck's driving around listening to Sandman, and the truck could be driving around listening to Enter Sandman.
Yeah, and then someone else did the joke about what would be the song Marty played at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and someone said it'd be really funny. It'd be like, "Hey Billy, you want that new sound you're looking for?" And he holds out the phone, and it's, "Do you have the time to listen to me whine?"
I don't know who made these observations, but
you know what though, it made me have a real thought though, and this is completely separate and a real derailment for the podcast, but why not? Because we're here. It made me really think about how a modern day Back to the Future wouldn't necessarily work the same way. You'd have to change it quite a lot, because a big part of the plot of the original Back to the Future was because things weren't recorded in the same way, because you didn't have the internet, because you didn't have phones or videos and all that stuff. Parents could just lie to their kids about their childhoods. And the people in the 80s pretended things were so wholesome and clean in the 50s. But then when Marty goes back, that's not true at all. His mum was quite happy to park a car and, sneak a bottle of booze into the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. His mum was a teenager, like all teenagers, and rebelled in her way. Today, you're going to struggle with that, because a modern-day parent who grew up in the 90s, one, people know what kids were like in the 90s. There's movies and TV shows, and culturally there's a more honest documentation of what those things are. Because to the people in the 80s, the 60s was the 50s, sorry, was like I Love Lucy kind of like sitcom wholesome, because even the media depicted that time as being wholesome in a sort of false way. But you look back now, you can look back, Malcolm in the Middle, Friends, these shows from the 90s depicted a more honest version of life. So a modern day child would not be surprised to find their parents were little shits in the past. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing. The problem you'd almost have to slightly solve with a modern day Back to the Future script. It really got me thinking about that. And also now how parents have to really be careful about scrubbing their internet history before they choose to have children, because everything you've ever done is recorded. How are you going to feel if you have kids and in 10 years' time they go back and start, 10, 20 years' time they start listening to these podcasts, Chris?
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, for sure. But there'll then come a time where I'm dead, and they'll appreciate it. They'll be glad. They'll be like, "Oh man, I missed Dad so much. Let me listen to him chat about masturbation with Uncle Dan."
I was going to go to something a little bit more like just let's hear him talk about what he ate for dinner, because sometimes we've done that when we talked about what we're going to eat for dinner.
That's true. We've done that a lot more than ever talk about masturbation.
Genuinely, the other day, someone commented on an old episode of Steven University, and I flicked to listen to the clip they were referring to, because obviously Steven University is a long time ago. I don't really remember what we said. So I found the moment and I was listening to it, and literally you're like, "Oh yeah, little update for everyone this week. I had the egg in the end," or something like that. You're like, "Oh, I had the this." Like it was like there'd been a big thing at the end of the previous episode where you'd been debating what to eat for dinner.
But the thing is though, even future children or whatever aside, no, you'd think that would be how it worked. I guarantee you, if anything happens to either of us, nobody's sitting through all these podcasts.
No, definitely not.
Do you know what I mean?
Definitely
if anything,
not.
It would help them with their grief, because they'd listen to 5 minutes and go, "No, you know what? This is still pretty hard work," and then stop listening. So yeah.
Anyway,
no one's eulogizing us that way.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
it's decades and decades in the future.
Yeah. So I do think I feel bad for if they ever do decide to do a modern day Back to the Future, because I feel like this is how this started. Do you remember? We'll go back to this.
You used such a I'm getting us back on track tone there. Like, yeah. So I feel bad for it, and then just continue. I know.
No. I know that's a tangent within a tangent. You have to go up by layer. So you can't go back to Korra. I've got to go wrap up that your kids listening to your podcast after your demise, back up one layer to Back to the Future. I wrap that up quickly and just say, I feel sorry for those guys, and then back up one layer to back to Korra.
I made it about both our demises just to make me feel better.
Yeah, but no one's going to be listening for me because I'll leave no children, so there'll be no one to do it. It'll be your kids going, fucking hell, who was this Dan guy again?
It's weird because Dad talks about him quite sweetly, but it sounds like they didn't really like each other. Jess is like, yeah, it was complicated. go give Dad his eggs. Yeah, no, Back to the Future would be difficult. And I still maintain my theory that most episodes of Seinfeld would fall apart now thanks to the invention of the mobile phone.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
A modern smartphone could solve basically any episode of Seinfeld. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And that's what I was going to say. We're here. We're at the layer. A great example of pacing. We don't see the wedding. We just get the joke of him turning up in the outfit. We can put the pieces together ourselves, and it flows very nicely.
Yeah, I mean, a wedding doesn't actually occur, but
Oh, does it not? Oh, I assumed it had, and that was the wedding gear.
No. I think she just now they're engaged. He's Water Tribe dressed. I think that's
right, okay.
I think he breaks it up before a sort of wedding occurs. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's still a lot to look forward to in the season. I still think on the whole there's been more good than bad, but this episode lent towards the bad for me. And it kind of, a lot of the bigger issues, the wider issues were exposed by this particular episode, I think. But with that said, there's still a lot to enjoy about it, and I'm still mostly enjoying this season. So I'll have to see where it goes from here. I'm trying to think, is this the season? I think this is the season. Yeah, it is. So this is the season that has a two-parter that I am really looking forward to revisiting because I always loved it. And then I've recently seen a few comments because I talked in the first season about this season having two particular episodes that I'm very, very fond of. And so a few people sent us comments that said, rewatch and we'll talk. Because apparently maybe not holding up so well. I'm very interested about that. And I don't mean in the problematic sense, like that there's something wrong with it. I just in terms of like it doesn't quite work on a rewatch for certain reasons. So we'll see. I'm quite excited about that. But I think that's a couple episodes away. But yeah, so that's the main stuff for this one. Shall we get to the triv, Chris?
Let's triv it up.
I'll give you some trivia. I just did that because you did like a pow sound at the end of yours. Nice. Even though Julie was present, her voice can be heard. Her face is not shown in this episode at all due to spending the entire thing inside the Platypus Bear costume. This is the only episode in which any cars or trucks are seen as part of the Water Tribe because how are cars getting around Water Tribe like snowy terrain?
Yeah.
And yet she pulls over that guy and interrogates him. Speaking of, Korra's interrogation of Judge Hatch was inspired by the television series 24 with Brian Kinitsko and Joaquin Dos Santos joking that Korra was a kid-friendly version of Jack Bauer. Now, here is the problem with that. In principle, that's fine, right? Dear listener, in theory, that's a nice idea. Yeah, okay, we're going to do the Jack Bauer thing of, like, the good guy forced to do the bad thing of making threats to the bad guy because they need information to save lives, the greater good. They're willing to get their own hands dirty and almost the moral quandary of their own soul is potentially going down when they're gone in order to do the right thing and save lives in the here and now. A lot of blood on Jack Bauer's hands, right? It's a constant moral dilemma for him. If you're going to do that, fucking do that. What are you talking about? Having Korra just threaten a guy and then him giving her the information is not the same fucking thing on any level. Because one, the show doesn't in any way challenge the morality side of it. No character calls her out on it. There's no dilemma. She never doubts whether that was the right thing to fucking do because the show never stops for a second for her to consider it. If that's the premise, have Mako go with her and be like, Korra, don't do this. You're assaulting a man. Like, and make it a moral dilemma and have it be her morals versus her dad, like saving her dad and her tribe. That's fine. That's great character stuff. What are you fucking talking about? You absolute lunatics.
I had absolutely no idea they were doing that.
No.
At no point did I go, oh, that's awfully Jack Bauer.
Right. Yeah. And here's the thing, like, I'm okay with that as a plotline. I even like that idea, making Korra a slightly morally grey avatar. The Avatar doesn't have to be a paragon of virtue and goodness. I think the Avatar can be a little bit willing to get their hands dirty. I think we saw that a little bit when we got glimpses of Avatar Kyoshi, and the Avatar Kyoshi books back that up. She's a very morally dubious figure. She had an interesting upbringing. So you're going to do that, great. I'm not against it. Just do it. Like, actually do it. Again, it's like they put a plot element in because they wanted to do a character thing, but then they never bothered to do the character thing. So then you go, why is that plot element there? Scratching my fucking head is what I'm doing right now. So, yeah, nice effort, I guess. I mean, I'm not against the attempt, the execution is all broken. So, sorry.
Yeah, it was, for sure.
Joshua Hamilton came up with the names for the Sky Bison calves, which Iki befriend because his daughter is fond of princesses. I think he was the writer of this episode, or one of the writers on this episode. Yes?
Cool.
Oh, no. I don't know who that is then. Producer, maybe? I'm not sure. I'll have to click on the name and get more information. I assumed he was a writer, and I never actually bothered to click to find out. He is... Oh, he's a writer, so he was obviously... Oh, he was probably in the room then. He's not actually credited as writing this episode, but he was a writer on the show, so in the room, he suggested those names. Fine. Perfect. The moment of Ping Ping pooping money was initially more graphic in its disbursement, so the money sort of like went further and like with a bit more force, is the wrong word, but the network requested it would be maybe a little less. Well, it doesn't say that here, but I imagine a little less graphic. If it just sort of dispersed the money like an ATM, it just drops the cash down, which is, I think, fine. So it's an interesting note.
Yeah, yeah. I think what they had was enough.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't really talked about is that Korra is actually, as a show, animated by two different studios. Studio Perrot and Studio Mir both did work, I believe, on like concurrent episodes. So I don't know if it was in batches of two or if it was every other episode, but two different studios animated this season. And the interesting thing on the trivia here is that despite Studio Perrot being the animation studio responsible for this one, Studio Mir's staff did some storyboarding and background design for the action sequences in this one, which is one of the few times, from what I understand it, the studio's works were combined. I don't know how that ended up happening. I'm just going to assume that Studio... Is it Perrot? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think they're a French studio. Just based on that spelling. But either way, I'm not sure what led to that happening, whether it was just resources and they just had to give it to someone, so they contracted the other studio. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to find the studio name. Oh, they're a Japanese animation studio that have borrowed that name from a French word. Okay, fine. Sure. Oh, they make anime. Oh, they appear to have animated Naruto episodes or movies. Oh, Anyway, irrelevant. So weirdly, the duties were shared on this particular episode. I'm not sure why. Bumi and Aang's statue being illuminated by a sliver of sunlight while contrasting with the other silhouetted statues in the sanctuary was a nod to the lighting techniques used in the film noir genre. Sure, why not? There you go. So that no Star Automobiles exists this week again. We had one car, but it just looked like one of the cars from the previous season, so there's nothing of note on that front. So now, everyone, some sarcastic people right now will be like, cover your ears, guys. I'm going to say open them wider. For what's about to happen. Go, Chris.
Responding a few months later to listener feedback.
Hi, and welcome to feedback from last series. That was incredible.
Thank you, mate.
I hope everyone turned up their microphone, their earphones for that, and opened their ears wider. So we got a comment which I thought was really interesting. So last year we talked a little bit about the air nomads, and we were sort of like, well, if Tenzin and his family are the last airbenders, who are these air acolyte type people that are in the airbender garb and around, and it basically just seemed like they were just trying to keep the culture going. But there wasn't really a lot of elaboration on the air acolytes and who they are. So someone added some context for us and said, in the comics, it's actually done. Sorry, I should clarify. This is someone called Merezco4339, and they commented on one of our videos and said, in the comics, it's actually really interesting. Basically, Aang's air nomad fan club become this show's air acolytes. After the fan club misappropriate air nomad culture, Aang decides to teach them what he knows and remembers from the culture, hoping to at least keep the spirit alive. So then the air nomad seat on the council in Republic City was most likely filled with a non-bender who was an air nomad fan / acolyte until Tenzin decided to run for office. So I really like that idea, actually, that there was a group that misappropriated air nomad culture, and rather than telling them off and stopping them, Aang worked with them to get it right. And I think that's fun and a nice idea. And it's a shame that's not in the show, because I think that would go a long way to making sense of those people. But also, I think that's just a really nice story.
Yeah, I think that's a clever idea. I like it.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot to say on it, but it was feedback we got from last series that I really liked. I don't know if I have anything to add other than thank you for sending us the context.
Thank you for letting us know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I mean, it almost makes me, because I didn't, whatever comic that one's from, I don't recall that one. I've not read that one, I don't think, because I've read some of the comics, but I only read the first couple. Maybe that's from a later one. Don't know. Not sure. So yeah, but that's it. Yeah, well, at some point we'll cover the comics. Although it's hard to tell right now, because there's rumors are all swirling about the new Avatar content they're making, and some people are predicting that they're going to cover the content of the comics, which is potentially nice, but I don't know. So I don't want to cover the comic and then have to cover the same story again through the TV or movie version of it. But time will tell.
Yeah, I think we there's more content coming. I think we'll do that.
Yeah, this podcast is one of those things that, like, unlike Steven University, when Steven Universe ended, it was really hard to keep it going. Although we got a comment the other day asking us to come back to remember we pitched live action movies?
Oh yeah.
Someone wanted us to come back to pitch our sequels to those movies.
God, I'd have to re-listen to.
Yeah, and re-watch a shit ton of the show.
Yeah.
It's been a little while. But anyway, yeah, so I mean, at some point maybe we will. I really want to do something this year for the 10-year anniversary, but we just not found the time. And the dates are coming. But anyway, so yeah, with Avatar, we've got a bunch of new stuff in the world of Avatar is being made right now, both in terms of the live action show, which we, for listeners listening to this when it's released, at the time of recording, we just got photos of what the cast look like in the new show, and they look like the characters. I can't really comment on whether that's good or bad yet. They look right. It's not, the set designs and character stuff look mostly okay with the last one, and you know how that turned out, with the exception of the race stuff aside. I still think the actual like design work on the film was pretty on point. Appa looked good, the sets looked good, the art direction in general was all right. So I can't really judge based on these photos, but we got the live action version coming next year, and then a ton of like movies and potentially a new series coming. So this podcast seems like it's going to be maybe the rest of our lives, Chris. But yeah, that's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. So anyway, yeah. Unless you've got anything to add to our Air Nomad info.
No, other than great. Thank you. Like you said, thank you for letting us know. That's fascinating.
Yes, so thank you again to Merezco4339, who sent that in. So then, time for wrapping things up. If you want to hear on the next episode of this very podcast, which is the episode on the Peacekeepers, then please feel free to go over to patreon.com/NothingButStaticUK. Oh no, just Nothing But Static, sorry, on the Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month you can support this show, get access to episodes of this podcast 1 week ahead of their normal Spotify, iTunes release. And then that supports us. It also gives you access to bonus content. On the first of every month, we release, something bespoke. At the moment, we're still doing Nothing But Lyrics, which is a fun little thing, where we analyse lyrics to a song, either make fun of it or try to make sense of them, or both, if it's all going well. Also, obviously, Rewind Reviews, the same deal, 1 week early, and also access to our Discord, where you can interact with us. It's a bit quieter, the Discord these days, but it's still used reasonably frequently, and I pop in there and check that out all the time. So yeah, that's how you can support us. Other ways you can support us, of course, is by telling a friend, or subscribing to one of those, on it, whatever your sort of podcast app of choice is. Subscribing to our feed and liking it and reviewing it on that feed helps us. Same with our YouTube channel. youtube.com/NothingButStaticUK. You can subscribe and like the videos there. Also, you'll have the ability to leave a comment there. So if you've got any feedback for us from this week, go over to YouTube. You can leave it on the actual video of this video version of this podcast, which again, I always have to clarify, doesn't mean video in the sense of you can see our faces. It's just a video version upload of it, so it's on YouTube, but it's just still images. I think that's everything. Oh yeah, of course, you can just keep listening if you want to support us that way too. And if you're not enjoying this, as always, we'll leave you here. That's fine. Not for everyone.
No problem at all. We're not for everyone. Most people we're not for, but if we are for you, thank you. If we're not, no worries. Thanks for giving it a shot.
Yeah, exactly that. We appreciate your time. You've gotten very far, especially considering some of the tangents. And I respect your dedication to giving this a go. But yeah, you're free. Go enjoy listening. There's many great podcasts. There's loads of them. Go check out any of them.
And to future Chris, if you're listening to this, to eulogize Dan, then you'd want me to get out there and live, wouldn't you, Dan? Go get out there and crack some eggs, my friend. Live a life.
Egg away.
Egg away. There you go.
So, with that said,
and know that you had a lasting impact, because and again, we're talking decades and decades down the line. Here's the thing, that little plaque that says Daniel Frederick Doolan, baby.
What makes me laugh, Chris? You can always really tell when we don't have a hard out on this podcast, can't you?
Yeah, and I still maintain that this podcast in particular is better when we do.
I agree. Thoroughly agree. Anyway, in the meantime, you can go support Raphodraws too, who gave us the key art that we use for this podcast, Appa at Sunset. Instagram.com/Raphodraws, spelled RAPHODRAWS. They also have a Tumblr and a Twitter and a YouTube, and go support them. They do some really good art. There's like a Redbubble account with lots of their cool art on things, and we all love to buy things, Chris.
Love things, man.
So yeah, head over to Raphodraws on all those platforms and support. So that's everything for this week. Loving it. Good time. Thanks everyone for listening.
Like that.
I've been Dan Doolan.
Thank you very much. I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll see you in a week's time when we sit down to review The Peacekeepers. Egg away.